Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, June 25th, 2024. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Peter Shamshiri, known as Law Boy on Twitter, co-host of If Books Could Kill and the 5-4 podcast.
Both are very good, gotta say. Watch our show first, though.
Yes, I mean, they're good compliments to this show. Also on the program today, Julian Assange strikes a plea deal for the DOJ, will return to Australia as we speak. It is primary day in Colorado and Utah and in New York. Biggest story, obviously, Jamal Bowman in serious jeopardy after an onslaught of AIPAC Republican money. Speaking of jeopardy, Bob Good, Congressman from Virginia, chair of the Freedom Caucus, his primary race still unresolved in a Freedom Caucus eats its own saga. Israeli Supreme Court rules that ultra-Orthodox must serve in the military, jeopardizing Netanyahu's governing coalition. Save the Children reports that an additional 20,000 children are missing in Gaza, and most of them are presumed dead. Federal judges in Kansas and Missouri halt much of Joe Biden's student loan plan, at least temporarily. And Louisiana parents sue to block the insertion of the 10 Commandments in school. And I should say, the Christian 10 Commandments in school. Speaking of theocracy, infant mortality rose 8% in the wake of Texas's abortion ban. Bankruptcy trustee has announced that he will force liquidation of Alex Jones's InfoWars. Our GoFundMe to be announced shortly to the purchase of that InfoWars.
Hassan Piker might beat us. Yeah.
New report. IRA created 300,000 new green jobs. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is
Newsday Tuesday.
Newsday Tuesday.
And Election Day, folks. Wait, I tried to reposition the sticker so it could be visible. I voted.
Speaking of repositioning, can you pan your camera a little bit so that we're not like that extra align those two a little bit more.
I'm not doing anything. What are you looking at?
Pan your camera so that a little bit more. A little bit more.
It's not responding on the with the.
All right. Well, you just did mine. Okay.
Which way do you want to?
Well, I'm just concerned about on her far left edge that black border is not aligning with the actual board. It's all right. I'm not going to get caught
Typical
up in
lib concerned about my far left edge.
Yep. If
move Emma to the right.
If Hassan is actually going to buy that, we should talk to him about
teaming up.
Well, I mean, teaming up, like letting him buy part of it for us. I mean,
right.
He's
got
massive.
funny money.
He's
yeah.
massive.
He can do whatever he wants.
Actually, that would actually be a great idea for him, taking it, because he's got multiple channels.
Right. Right.
That would actually be that would be a smart thing for somebody to go do that had the ability to do that.
Some uncle advice over here.
Yep. There you go. Just take my word for it. Good investment for us. We will be talking about the Julian Assange plea deal later after we speak to Peter Shamshiri about some of the legal rulings that the Supreme Court handed down last week and the ones we anticipate them doing over the next week. We'll be talking a lot about the Supreme Court rulings. As far as the Julian Assange thing, it is the plea deal is essentially he will plead guilty to the publication of secret information in exchange for the 5 years that he's already served in Belmarsh. And sort of obviously for Assange, it is the end of a literally torturous, almost 11 years now, I think.
Yeah, ruined a good chunk of his life.
From the perspective of the concern for the protection of the media, this charge, and he could have been faced with other charges around computer fraud, having to do with arguably around the hacking of the Clinton emails and the DNC emails. This charge is the most problematic from the perspective of setting a precedent for journalists. Over the next day, maybe tomorrow, we'll have somebody on to discuss about the implications of that. We don't know all the details yet either from this.
But it's under the Espionage Act, right? So that is.
I don't know that if it's actually technically under the Espionage Act, but it could be.
Yeah.
But we need. We gotta get a little more clarification on that. But we will bring somebody on tomorrow to discuss. My understanding is he's going to be in the Mariana Islands to do the plea deal, which is technically part of the United States, en route to Australia. So we'll have more on that. In the meantime, if you live in New York's 16th district, you need to go vote if you haven't already voted. Jamal Bowman, we've seen early voting numbers, and on their face, they do not look good for Jamal Bowman. Much of the votes coming from sort of the more suburban parts, I guess, of Westchester, the wealthier parts of Westchester, more considered Latimer territory. I think more people voted in Scarsdale than in Mount Vernon, and they have fairly widely divergent populations. So that's not a great sign for Jamal Bowman. But here is George Latimer on with CNN, Caitlin Collins, last night. Now, this is a guy who was such a scofflaw, had to borrow his staffer's car when he ran in at somebody. He's being sued. It's unclear what the situation's. He has not released his text messages during that, from when he was actually driving at that time. And I suspect this may come out in the lawsuit. This is a guy who gave his girlfriend, or his paramour, I guess, whatever, his second. I don't know. He's got a primary.
Don't put a label on it.
Whatever it is. There was clearly a case of nepotism when he hired her for a county position. And a guy who's been sort of relentlessly racist in claiming why Jamal Bowman won his election in the first place.
Criticized for saying that he had a constituency in Dearborn, Michigan, which has a large Arab population. People were saying that those were racist comments. Do you stand by what you initially said?
Well, let me get the quote right. What I said at the time was he has raised money from places like San Francisco and Dearborn, Michigan. That's accurate fact, because what he did is create a joint fundraising organization with Representative Tlaib, who's based in Dearborn, Michigan. So it's not the city of Dearborn. It's that Representative Tlaib is from there. She's been raising money. I think she transferred $500,000 in part to him. So the question is, when someone looks at where's the money coming from, who are the sources that are driving your policy, the incumbent
Pause
is getting his money
pause it for a moment. I mean, look, this guy has received so much Republican and Israel lobbying money. And had Bowman said he got this money from Israel or Israel interests, there would be a 5-alarm fire in this. So the idea that, he's using shorthand here.
My understanding is Tlaib's not from Dearborn either, and that Dearborn was just added to her district recently. But Eric Michael Garcia said, I pulled campaign finances of Bowman and Latimer. Overall, Bowman only received $1,850 from Dearborn, Michigan from 4 donors. He received 0 from San Francisco. Meanwhile, Latimer received 19 donations of more than $12,000 from San Francisco.
Transferred $500,000 in part to him. So the question is, when someone looks at where's the money coming from, who are the sources that are driving your policy, the incumbent is getting his money from outside the district, from a host of these different sources that aren't.
Yeah, but do you see how people saw it that way, given obviously Dearborn is so prominent and known for its large Arab population?
I think what you had is my opponent wanted to misrepresent what I said. And once he misrepresents it to make it sound like I'm picking on a municipality with an ethnicity, as opposed to his commitment to joint fundraise with Representative Tlaib. That's what I actually said. So the spin, and that's what we deal with so many times in these campaigns, that one wants to spin something a specific way. I know the quote that I said, and it's on tape. So,
and you stand by that comment. When you look,
I mean, good opportunity to bring in outside money. Good opportunity to say, like, when you talk about ethnicity, what about you literally saying that he has an ethnic advantage,
ethnic benefit
in the district?
Exactly. That's what he's saying. I mean, Demsak Shan, Tlaib is not from Dearborn, does not live in Dearborn, and did not even represent Dearborn before 2022 redistricting.
No. So that's obviously a dog whistle, which, as you said, Sam, if Bowman had approached something in that manner, it would have been a comment that was widely disseminated and criticized. Latimer has a long history of racist politics. He was ideologically aligned with the IDC as well in the New York state government, which was an independent Democratic caucus that basically decided, even though you elected us as Democrats because we want more power and some more benefits and kickbacks, basically, we're going to vote as Republicans and operate as Republicans. So that's the ilk that he operates in. And as I mentioned, during his time in Westchester in the 90s, he was one of the people that was vehemently opposing public housing, and the movement behind that he was a part of was explicitly a racist one, depicted in the show Show Me a Hero as it relates to Yonkers, but just this was about Westchester. So this is a guy that is a part of the Democratic Party conservative machine here in New York that has real issues with corruption and self-dealing and conservatism, even though they call themselves Democrats. And the idea that one of our best members of Congress, most progressive members of Congress, could be ousted by this because AIPAC decided and Republicans decided, let's make an example out of this guy for daring to stand up to Israel for committing a genocide. That would be a depressing state of affairs. So go out and participate.
Let's also, Disco Stu writes, curious if you read Josh Marshall's take on the Bowman race. It was an interesting take that seems more accurate. Basically, AIPAC spending is more about the perception of their strength versus AIPAC being the reason Bowman is losing the polls. Yeah, I read that. I'm not 100% convinced of that, frankly. There's no doubt AIPAC was shopping around, looking at the squad and seeing who they could challenge, and they're going to challenge who they see as the most vulnerable. a year and a half ago, they were convinced that they were going to be able to challenge Ilhan Omar. They may have been convinced they were going to be able to challenge AOC or Tlaib, for that matter. But I would imagine the polling looked at and they said Bowman is the best opportunity in New York. They definitely wanted to have one in New York because that is where the media is, and that's going to amplify what they're doing. They also, again, you remember they tried this with Summer Lee 2 years ago. It failed. And Cori Bush is the next vulnerable person, in terms of the squad. They also took out Levin in Michigan 2 years ago. There was one or two others. Obviously, they just successfully prevented Jayapal running in Washington State.
If I'm not mistaken, also the Marie Newman, Sean Caston, Illinois primary, and Newman lost.
Yep.
Nina Turner was also
and Chantel
defeated.
Brown, yeah.
Well, if you go back, you're also talking about Donna Ellis, too. So, Edwards, sorry. So I'm not convinced that $17 million of money dropped into a congressional race has no impact, or that it is not the but for in this case. It is conceivable. But look, Latimer is a garbage candidate. He's garbage. And now it's possible that maybe we'll talk more about this tomorrow when we get when we have a clearer picture of what's going on. But I'm sorry. There's just absolutely no way I'm going to believe that Scarsdale is coming in with more raw votes prior to Election Day, with a 40% voting rate just in general. I mean, who knows what it's going to be added on Election Day for a primary in June if there isn't $15 million dropped in this race.
We could just speak to it anecdotally. I mean, I was at the gym yesterday and I'm on the treadmill. The TV, I'm on there for 20 minutes. The ad from the United Democracy Project played 3 times criticizing Jamal Bowman. They don't mention Israel once. It's about how Bowman is standing in the way of Biden's agenda. This is just an all-out blitz.
I don't even know if the ads are even, I mean, the $15 million, a significant portion of that is just sending people into Jewish community centers up in Scarsdale, or the local temple, the synagogues, and driving people to the polls and bringing them the ballots and whatnot. I mean, you can pay for an amazing get out the vote operation with, never mind $15 million. I mean, you're talking, when I say 40% of Scarsdale voted, that's like 1,500 people in terms of the Democrats that are registered there. And you can get 40%, 1,500 people. How much, you do the math.
Yeah. In 2020, that was the last contested primary against Elliot Engel. The vote total there was 89,000, just a little bit over that. So you can just, in early voting.
In the whole district.
In the whole district.
Right. It's going to be closer to 100,000 in this race. And if you don't think that $15 million doesn't make that happen, I'm sorry. I think that's a little bit motivated reasoning. But in a moment, we're going to be talking to Peter Shamshiri, law boy on Twitter, co-host of the If Books Could Kill and the 5-4 podcast, which are both great podcasts.
I like them both, but not as much as this one.
No, they're good, actually. I have a good friend who
I know.
was like, have you ever listened to 5-4 podcast? I'm like, yeah, you've asked me this 7 times. I've told you, yes, I have listened, and we have Law Boy on a regular basis. And I'm like, how come you keep asking the same question? Yeah. Folks, I don't know if you can see this, but I have some flyaways on my head.
I hear that. Yeah.
Short little hairs. You know why? Because about a year ago, I guess, I started taking Nutrafol. We tried to get Michael to take it years ago. He didn't want to. And at one point, I'm like, I'm starting to feel like my hair is thinning a little bit. And when you get to be my age, it's like I have very few things going for me. And
your hair is the selling point.
Yeah, it's one of them.
I hear
and aside from my sunny disposition, and I was like, I didn't want to. I didn't want to deal with any thinning, and I didn't want to, take any, I didn't want to have to take anything that was going to maybe have some side effects. It was going to be problematic. Anyway, summer's finally here. It means more time spent outside. Sunday mornings mowing the lawn, days at the beach, or having a drink on the deck after a long day. I don't have a deck, but want to take care of your hair? You got sun, salt, SPF can all affect your hair health. Now is the perfect time to start taking Nutrafol. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist recommended hair growth supplement brand, with over 1 million people seeing thicker, stronger, faster growing hair with less shedding. Nutrafol's hair growth supplements are physician formulated using 100% drug-free ingredients. Their patented technology provides consistent, reliable results without compromising your sex life. So while many supplements rely solely on ingredient studies, the difference with Nutrafol is they actually studied the combination of ingredients. So it's not like this one ingredient has this effect and that one ingredient. No, the combination has been studied. In a clinical study, 84% of men showed improvements in their hair after 6 months of taking Nutrafol's men's hair growth supplements. Go take their hair wellness quiz on Nutrafol.com/men. It'll give you a personalized hair health plan based upon your specific, no pun intended, root causes. With Nutrafol, building a hair growth routine is simple. All you gotta do, you purchase online. You don't need a prescription. You don't need a doctor's visit. Free shipping, automated deliveries. Ensure you'll never miss a day. You will see results within 3 to 6 months. Take the first step towards achieving your hair growth goals. For a limited time, Nutrafol offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com/men. Enter the promo code TMR. Find out why over 4,500 healthcare professionals and stylists recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair. Nutrafol.com /men, spelled Nutrafol.com/men, promo code TMR. That's Nutrafol.com, promo code TMR. We'll put a link, of course, in the podcast and YouTube descriptions and at majority.fm. Quick break, and we'll be right back with Peter Shamshiri, or as you may know him, Law Boy. We'll be right back. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. A pleasure to welcome back to the program Peter Shamshiri. He is also known as Law Boy on Twitter, and he is the co-host of If Books Could Kill and the 5-4 podcast, which are great podcasts that Emma loves to talk about constantly.
Hey, I'm a fan.
No, I do. Honestly, like I have one friend who keeps asking me if I've listened to your podcast, and I've told him yes, like 6 times.
I mean, and you guys have like a good podcast format too, where I want to introduce people to more progressive topics or thought points or viewpoints or whatever. So I hand them over to If Books Could Kill, because it's a funny way to like criticize people like Thomas Friedman, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, and look, I support people continuously asking everyone they know if they listen to my podcast. You got to drive it home.
Right. No, exactly. No, I get it. Without a doubt. All right. In the meantime, let's talk about a couple of the court cases that came down last week. Before we get into that, it's insane to me. I mean, obviously, that we haven't heard about the immunity case at this point. And it's also feels very backloaded. I mean, I think like during COVID, we went into July for rulings because they had to take off a significant amount of time. But this seems, I mean, like, what is your sense of what's going on in terms of that? Or am I making more of it than is really?
Maybe. I mean, it's always worked like this to some degree. It's not crazy to think that they'll polish off the rest of the term this week. 3 opinion days suggest to me that that's what they're trying to do. The only really egregious case is the Trump immunity case, because the entire play is to stall as long as possible to make sure that this does not occur before the election. And in that sense, the case it's over. Trump won. The sort of functional result is going to benefit Trump no matter what the court actually holds. With respect to the other cases, I don't know. I mean, they always stall till the end of the term. It is weird that they have, a 20 to 25% smaller caseload than they have historically, and they're still taking this long, still dragging their feet. But I just think that's because they don't have real jobs. So,
do you think there's friction between John Roberts and Alito because Alito leaked the Dobbs case?
Allegedly.
Well, I am convinced he did it. So I'm not even going to say allegedly. I mean, he either directed the leaking or engaged in the leaking. And he can sue me if he. I would like to see in Discovery. I would love to see what's going on
well,
here.
Martha Ann can't wait.
Yeah,
she's
exactly.
Just very
She's going to wait for the 5-year statute of limitations or whatever is defamation. But do you think there's any type of friction going on in the court, like around that?
I would say that in general, I would be surprised if Roberts wasn't somewhat irritated by the fact that he has sort of lost control over the PR aspect, and that Alito in particular feels like he can sort of freewheel. He has been leveraging the Wall Street Journal as his sort of PR arm for a couple of years now. And
thank you.
I would imagine that someone like Roberts, whose mission has always been very optics driven, is bothered by that. What it translates to behind the scenes, I don't know. They're always all surprisingly nice to each other in a way that I'm not with any colleague I've ever had. And so who knows? Maybe they're all buds or maybe they hate each other. It's hard to say, but it seems pretty obvious to me that Alito is like undermining Roberts' mission to some degree.
Yeah, I think Robert's legacy is really, impaired. And that to me has always struck me as what's so important to him. And also by Clarence Thomas too. I mean, it is a little bit awkward to be like, hey, wait a second.
Yeah.
How come you have a billionaire that's paying for all your stuff and we don't get one? But be that as it may, let's talk about let's start with the one that impacts billionaires. And that would be the Moore versus United States, which was a Supreme Court decision that was decided last Thursday. People have been paying attention to this because of its implications for the wealth tax. But why don't you give us the facts on it? And then I think we even spoke about this when it was brought up in front of the court, frankly.
Yeah, we may have. The actual case is quite narrow. It's about the mandatory repatriation tax, which is this Trump era one-time tax on like closely held foreign corporations. And this couple, the Moores, they are challenging their tax burden, which I think was something like 15 grand, nothing massive, under basically saying that this is an unrealized gain and that the tax on it is therefore unconstitutional. This sort of aligns with this longtime conservative argument about taxing unrealized gains. and about what's called under the Constitution direct taxation in general. Basically, the Constitution says that indirect taxes, meaning taxes on income, labor, must be applied uniformly across the states, meaning each person must have the same tax burden. But direct taxes, like property taxes, must be apportioned evenly among the states, which means that each state would have to generate an equal amount of tax revenue per capita. This is something that I'm not a historian, but it dates to the founding. My understanding is that it's essentially a slavery era compromise. It's right next to the 3/5 compromise. Basically, Southern states were looking to avoid slavery being taxed out of existence. And so this sort of ensure that would happen, that any burden would be distributed evenly. And conservatives have long argued that this means that like federal property taxes are unconstitutional, or at least functionally unconstitutional, because you'd have to institute this elaborate system, and that the same applies to wealth taxes. And so a lot of conservatives were looking for the court to go very far here and say all taxes on wealth are going to be unconstitutional unless they abide by the apportionment system, which would, again, be basically logistically unfeasible, or at least very complicated. The court didn't do that. They sort of very intentionally, very consciously sidestepped the issue, and Kavanaugh writes a majority that basically says we're not touching that issue quite yet, but very heavily implies at the same time that when they do eventually reach that issue, they will side against a wealth tax.
Let me see if I just understand this in terms of the direct and indirect taxes, because the indirect being you're not taxing the person, you're taxing their activity. So if you work, we're going to have a payroll tax, 6, 7%, 8%, I guess it is now, and your employer has to pay for the other half of it. And it only goes up to the first $120,000. How? And the direct tax has to be apportioned between the states. Is that it? I mean,
by population. So it would have to be the same per capita across the states.
Okay. So, and that would be difficult to do because you have money concentrated. Let's say if we did a wealth tax and we said across the board, if you have over $50 million, you owe 75% tax on it. I mean, if it's up to me, I would say 90%, but let's just, whatever it is. New York State would end up paying a lot. There'd be a lot more money coming out of New York State. I mean, I guess that's just the way it is. They would have to go by the state functioning, or Florida, I guess, would be, wherever someone are escaping. So is there a way around that, though? I mean,
there have been proposals. I will not say that I understand them very well, but there have been proposals. The real problem is that most taxes, as we understand them, are just, here's X economic activity, we're going to tax it at Y rate. Whereas this would have to have some sort of, would be sort of reverse engineered, because you need the outcome to be a certain rate per capita for each state. So it would have to work very differently from normal income taxes. It probably can be done. But if you look at like the Bernie Sanders, Liz Warren proposals coming out of 2020, those would be unconstitutional.
And also, to be clear, I mean, I just want to clear this up because this comes up. The idea of taxing unrealized gains, we do that, or states do it. So it's not impossible to do. I mean, I don't know how much someone's house is worth until it actually sells. Particularly, like in this market, in Brooklyn, it's crazy how much stuff sells for. But you take a guess. And then, that's it. There's an assessment that's made. And that can be done from afar. This isn't that complicated. People say, like, what about artworks? Well, I mean, when you take it to Sotheby's, they have a notion of how much it's worth and where they're going to start the bidding. Okay, I'm okay with, lowballing a little bit of some of these paintings. That's okay. As long as we get to the heart of like where the big money is.
In general, the whole like direct versus indirect thing has never made a ton of sense to me. There's this story that's famous among nerds where at the founding, someone asked the question, hey, what is a direct tax? And no one answers. So I don't know that there's like a clear definition. We've sort of decided, and the Supreme Court back in like the 1890s decided that this is property taxes, for example, taxes on wealth. But I don't see how taxing, for example, unrealized capital gains is more direct than taxing dividend income, for example. It feels like a very sort of abstract difference.
And theoretically, a court, long after I'm passed away, I guess, if there's an opportunity for a different sort of a breakdown on the court, could redefine what direct taxes are, right? I mean, since we've never had an actual issue involving them, it's completely theoretical.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, again, it doesn't really mean anything inherently. The regime that it was sort of describing at the founding isn't one that meaningfully exists anymore. So in my mind, it could be reinterpreted and should be reinterpreted, and probably should be ignored for most purposes.
You could also theoretically, just one final thing too, is to say, okay, we can't, the federal government can't tax these billionaires directly. So what we're going to do is your highway funds, your Medicaid funds, your whatever federal subsidies you get are all going to be contingent upon you collecting this tax. And you could have the states do it, right? As basically as a surrogate.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this Supreme Court probably wouldn't allow it. They would say that you are bullying.
No, they wouldn't even allow you to expand Medicaid.
Right. Right, but yeah, I mean, absolutely. That's a possibility under a normal human Supreme Court.
I mean, Ronald Reagan said if you don't drop your speed, your maximum speeds to 55, or I should say, drop your drinking age. I think it was to raise your drinking age. Excuse me, to 21. You're going to lose your federal highway funds.
Yeah,
and the rationale, I guess, being that people are going to die on the highways or whatever it was, but that's pretty far afield. All right, let's move on to the other court decision that we heard last week. This was U.S. versus Rahimi. Did I say it right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
As far as I know.
This one was a bit of a mess, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's a mess that the court put themselves in. So yeah, this is about the constitutional right of someone with a domestic violence restraining order to own a firearm, which is, it's weird to say out loud. Basically, this is about a guy who had a violent conflict with his girlfriend, pulled a gun, fired a shot either toward her or a witness, we don't know, and then was a suspect in multiple shootings over a pretty short period of time.
6 different shooting crimes.
Yeah, one of them was firing a gun into the air when his credit card was declined at a restaurant. So that's the only one that's
good
funny.
American, Peter. I mean, come on, exercising his First Amendment rights there, or second, Jesus.
If he'd been able to throw it up in the air and hit it while he was firing, that's. I mean,
that should be legal.
Yeah.
I mean, so this guy, gets the girlfriend gets a restraining order, and then this guy challenges it, basically saying, "I have a Second Amendment right." The twist here is that in 2022, while his case is pending, the court hands down NYSERPA v. Bruin, which says that the test for firearms regulations under the Second Amendment is that in order for them to be constitutional, you need to show that they are consistent with our nation's tradition of firearm regulation, which in practice, they say, means finding an analogous law from the founding era, which puts this huge burden on the government in all of these cases, including this one, to find a law from the founding era that looks like the law that they have passed to regulate firearms, which means, in this case, finding a law that looks like telling a guy with a domestic violence restraining order, which is something that really did not meaningfully exist at the founding, that he can't have a gun.
Okay, there's multiple things I got to stop you here and ask. First off, let's work backwards. Was domestic violence even a legal concept at that time when your wife was your property?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not really. There were sort of these restrictions on interpersonal violence that could apply to marital relationships at certain times, but domestic violence as this like discrete thing didn't really exist. For the record, there also there weren't rates of murder, for example, in marriages that we are aware of that are anywhere near what we see now. It might just be that we're looking at bad reporting, underreporting, but it's sort of, there are just not a lot of parallels, right? Like the whole legal structure of marriage was different. The sort of like the access to weapons for the median person was wildly different. It's just not a similar situation to anything that you saw in the founding.
What is the founding era? Like, how do we determine? Like, I know when the Constitution was signed. I know when the Declaration of Independence was signed. But what's the legal definition for an era? Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years?
So Thomas in Bruin doesn't really explain this. He basically examines the period from the founding itself, like early 1790s, through the Reconstruction Amendments, or up until the Reconstruction Amendments. So we're looking at an era of 80 years. Amy Coney Barrett writes about this in her concurrence a little bit, that basically implying like we need to figure that part out at some point.
Yeah, like, because 80 years, like that's the era. Like, I mean, that is just, it's completely made up.
I mean, the test is so ridiculous that it's hard to harp on one part of it as like notably dumb. But I do think that like the era concept doesn't really make sense. We're talking about several generations passing. The Thomas decision in Bruin talks about all these laws throughout this era, but it's sort of unclear what weight we're supposed to give to different time periods, whether the founding itself or right before the founding is supposed to be like the time that we're focused on, or whether, it makes more sense to focus on, the 1860s when we've had 70 years of the Constitution existing to build on. No one knows. I mean,
what if it was like determined based upon like garb? Like we just did it like if they dress alike during that period or something to that effect. But let me ask you another question, because the whole gist of this, it seems to me, is that this is a completely, first of all this originalism is all made up. I mean, it's made up, but not even like everything's constructed. But this is like constructed without a foundation. And it's like, you come into the house and you find out like they didn't insulate this at all. And wait a second, they don't do 16, on center for the studs. They just do it haphazard. I mean, the whole thing is just so made up. But why wouldn't you apply this concept to, let's say, I don't know, like free speech? Because you know what there also wasn't during the founding era? Radio, TV, internet. Why does free speech apply to radio, TV, and internet if it didn't exist at that time?
I mean, I think the case with free speech is even worse than that. I mean, in the founding era, broadly defined, we had the Alien and Sedition Act, right? I mean, the common understanding of free speech was completely different at the time. And I think there's like some concern that they start building this history and tradition concept out across the Bill of Rights, and you see free speech get whittled away on that basis. I mean, what Thomas says in Bruin and is reiterated in Rahimi is, if you can't find a perfect analogy for the problem being addressed by the legislature, that you can use more distant analogies, but the more distant they get, the faker it becomes. And I think the real story of this case is that the conservatives sort of reveal that they embarrass themselves by trying to do this, that they spend 40 years developing this theory of originalism. They finally get the chance with the 6-3 supermajority to start putting it into practice, and they build this history and tradition test out, and their first real attempt falls apart immediately, and they have to return 2 years later because some guy who's firing gunshots in restaurants when his card gets canceled now is claiming he has a constitutional right to a gun, and he sort of has a point if you read their prior cases.
I mean, this is so when I read into all this, it is so analogous to like debates I've had with libertarians, or like getting on, calling into a right-wing talk show, and they allowed me, they have been in their bubble for so long that the rigor associated with developing this theory, which has existed for, I mean, decades now, there's been no rigor. And so they haven't had to address even the most basic application of this. And that's why, apparently, all these subsidiary courts are writing back, we don't know how to apply this standard because it's not a standard. It's right. It's like, I don't know, somebody walking around tasting different wines and giving a sense of whether it's fruity or woody or whatever it is. There's no standard here at all.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the lower courts, and usually the Supreme Court will hand down a decision, see how the lower courts are handling it, and then maybe a decade later, they might step back into the fray, right? And clarify some things. They come back 2 years later in this case because it's been such a disaster in the lower courts, because you have courts holding that, for example, there's a constitutional right to scratch the serial number off of guns, that age restrictions of certain types are unconstitutional. Assault rifles have been found, and high capacity magazines have been found to be constitutionally protected by several courts. So there's just a lot of chaos in the lower courts. It's the direct result of their standardless, bizarre decision in 2022 in Bruin. And this is the court sort of, without saying it, because they do blame the lower courts. Roberts immediately is there's been a lot of misunderstanding about our decision in Bruin. So they won't really admit it, but this is the result of the court messing it up. That's why there's 5 concurrences. There's 3 concurrences from conservatives alone, just sort of desperately trying to explain themselves. And that's not even counting the Thomas dissent, because Thomas thinks that this is in fact unconstitutional.
So, but is there any more? I mean, if I'm a lower court now and I get this Rahimi case, and I've had problems applying Bruin, and I get this Rahimi case and I look at it and I go, I am at exactly the same place as I was 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, I think what Roberts really did with this majority opinion was broaden the standard rather than clarify it. So previously you had courts looking for analogous cases that can uphold a regulation, and if they can't find one, they strike it down as unconstitutional. That's pretty much what Bruin told them to do. Here, Roberts says, look, you shouldn't be so focused on cases. You should be looking at the broader principles, which, by the way, is a little bit less originalist, a little bit more living constitutionalist.
I mean, isn't that almost definitionally not originalist?
More or less, he acts of course, that this was what they meant all along. But I don't think that he provided any clarity at all. I think what he did was provide the flexibility that some of the lower courts need to have an off-ramp from some of these more ludicrous outcomes, so that courts can stop saying, hey, this is unconstitutional. However, this is an absurd result. Someone please help me. Because several federal courts wrote that decision.
does this do rulings like this degrade? I mean, I have a certain amount of skepticism about sort of all of it in terms of like this is canonized, and the idea of like we don't look for an outcome and then reverse engineer it, and but lower courts in particular, obviously, there's more standards. They know they're going to get reviewed, and so there are some like sort of parameters for them in which they operate. But it feels to me like this sort of like degrades that. It spreads the disease that exists at the Supreme Court, where they just make up stuff. And it basically says like, we can't come up with parameters. So we're just going to basically say, you guys make up stuff. And if it's really, really a problem, we'll step in. But in the meantime, it's whatever disease we got, we're going to give it all to you on some level. That's what it sort of feels like. It's going to degrade the lower courts too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if it degrades it as much as it like reveals how sort of completely fictional a lot of these tests are. I mean, the previous test, the one that really dominated across the country, was a balancing test, which is sort of how almost every constitutional right in the Bill of Rights works. That you would say, what's the government interest? What's the right? And let's balance those out, right? Now that's just as much a matter of the court's opinion as like the principles of the founding era or something broad like that. But I do think that like,
but you can measure that,
leeway,
though, right? But you can measure that. Like you can say, like, okay,
it's better. I mean, first of all, it factors in the government's interest, and this doesn't.
Right. I mean, you and I could disagree, like how much it's actually in the government's, but we have to articulate it. We actually have to make a case. Like saying that this is you could just sort of make that out of whole cloth. I mean, like it's just as valid to say like there was no domestic violence back then because, everything was violent. It was violent on the prairie. And so, I mean,
yeah, I mean, I don't think that these are like substantively equivalent, but I do think that, and to be clear, I think that what the court is doing to some degree is giving weapons to conservative courts, right? Because the principles, broadly speaking, that existed at the founding were more reactionary principles than exist today. And so, generally speaking, you're going to see more reactionary outcomes, right? And what their goal is to erase the government's interest from these calculations. And they've always hated this. They've always hated balancing the right against the government's interest in these cases because they don't care about the government's interest in Second Amendment cases. And I think that that's what one of the goals of these sort of originalist tests was, not just to sort of like focus on the founding era, which they had already been doing to some degree in their jurisprudence, but to just wipe the government's interest out of the equation altogether.
All right. Let's just lastly, there was this case, Department of State versus Munoz. There's some people who, have, one of them is Sonia Sotomayor, that brought up that the decision in Munoz could be a path to reversing marriage equality in some fashion. God bless you. What is your sense of that?
I'm not sure that they need to forge a path for themselves. Right. I do think that if in 3 years, for example, Obergefell is overturned, you're going to see a citation to Munoz. Like that's just how they operate, right? They sort of create their own justifications over time. I mean, the court's language in this was pretty dismissive of the 14th Amendment liberty interest in marriage, and that is what Obergefell is predicated upon in part. So it feels to me like that's what the court is hinting at. I think Sotomayor is sort of correct to be concerned. I think that my concern about marriage equality exists outside of the context of this case. I think this case is more of a symptom of the disease that will eventually if untreated, lead to the overturning of Obergefell.
Right. I mean, I think there's a clear sense that they are heading in that direction, and every now and then they may leave, I don't know, some utility, the tool by the side of the road for them to come pick it up next time they come down.
Yeah, they all they need is a couple little sentences to quote, and that allows them to feel like they're doing law, and then they hand down the decision that they want to hand down. I think that's where they're headed here. Whether they overturn Obergefell, to me, is almost entirely a matter of political appetite. Is Kavanaugh in for it? Is Gorsuch in for it? Who knows?
Based upon the last question, we heard that Martha Alito tape, and one of the most interesting things coming out of it is that she's talking like Alito is going to be off the court within 5 years, so that she's going to go hog wild on all her defamation suits. Yeah. Particularly that woman from 20 years ago who said that, criticized her outfit or whatever it was.
Right.
Do you think that there's going to be, like, in the event that Biden wins, assuming it's going to be Biden and Trump, that Thomas and Alito are going to be fighting over who gets to retire? I mean, and how many millions of dollars will Harlan Crow have to pay Clarence Thomas to stay on the Supreme Court? Like, obviously not directly, but I mean, how many, I don't know how many family members that Thomas has that he can have houses bought for. But what do you, what would you say the dollar figure is?
I think they hang on, first of all. I do think that Clarence gets, you have to factor in inflation in the gifts, know. So I'm thinking $1 to $2 million over the course of a Biden second term. Clarence, you have to keep in mind with Thomas in particular, he's energized by the rise of fascism. Like, remember when he went almost a decade not saying anything?
Right.
And then Trump came along, and all of a sudden he's like, he's got the spirit
Unleashed.
A little bit, right?
Yeah.
Now he's chatty. Now he has, an energy behind him. And I think Biden term 2 keeps him energized. I think he gets so mad thinking about Joe Biden that it keeps him going every day.
Well, Peter, I'm going to say I think you're lowballing it, because if I'm Clarence Thomas, $1 to $2 million, that may be a little bit in regards to inflation. But I also know, like, these are desperate times for the Harlan Crows. You're going to need this. So I'm going to say, $4 to $8.
Look, you might be right. And some of that could just be paid to Ginny, some political consulting. Why go the gift route when you can just hand it to whatever weird little LLC Ginny's got?
It's both. It's called a limited hangout. That's why. Look at the free trip he got. Meanwhile, she's making like $16,000 an hour, sending out mailers for Hillsdale College or something. Peter Shamshiri, thank you so much for coming on. We will put a link to both If Books Could Kill and the 5-4 podcast, of which you co-host both, and encourage people to keep asking your friends if you've listened to them.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. All right. We went longer than I thought we would.
Yeah.
That never happens.
No.
Who thought we would?
When you said, we won't go too long. We won't go too long with Peter. We'll just then, I was like, there's no chance. There's no chance.
Please.
Yep.
And it's a Supreme Court guest.
Yep. This is the season, folks.
Yep.
And it is always such a crap show now with the Supreme Court. But this originalism thing, it's fascinating, because all these courts keep writing in their decisions or their non-decisions, we need clarification on this because this doesn't make any sense. And then at the Supreme Court, they're like, oh, I've built my whole career on originalism, and it turns out it doesn't make any sense. How am I going to avoid confronting that?
Yep.
It's so funny that they found a word so close to fundamentalism.
Yeah, it's like faith. It's faith.
Yeah.
And how do you know where this falls? You ask the priest.
Ask
Period.
the authority.
End of story. That's it.
Yeah, unfortunately for them, it seems like their priest, they haven't been able to go to gosh, what was
Mount Olympus?
No. Gosh, the deceased Supreme Court justice. What is wrong with my brain today? No. Scalia. Yeah, he's the high priest of originalism.
I mean, he is not. I mean, Thomas is was more so, I think.
But Thomas is more blunt. I mean, he's just more nakedly like, I'm here to be a mercenary on behalf of the right, and I don't really want to spend too much time elaborating on this.
Scalia literally thought he was a founding father.
Yes, right.
Now, do we have this right now? There's only 3 eras in American history. Are we doing it by 80 years?
Are they all? They're all equally distant. They're all equally length.
I don't know. I'm asking you. You're a little.
I mean, I go by Hobsbawm. So you got the Age of Revolution, the Age of Capital, the Age of Empire, and then the Age of Extremes. So 4.
Okay. I don't think the Supreme Court's going by Hobsbawm.
You don't think so?
No, I'd probably not. Folks, it's your support that makes the show possible. I want to remind you, we are going to be covering the debate. Now, we're going to be a little bit low-key about it because everybody's talking about how CNN's going to, ding everybody and try and pull their channels down. And
enclosure of the commons, folks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, but we're going to get a hold of this secret information and leak out the contents of the debate between the 2 presidential candidates. What an effed up system.
Exactly. It's incredible. If CNN wants to air it, fine. It needs to be simulcast on C-SPAN, and then everybody has a fair use option.
It's public property. It should be. And the idea that we're not just like watching it for how the candidates behave, but also for how it's covered. So our commentary will not just be on the presidents, but the product that CNN puts out itself.
Look,
that's why we should be able to cover
there's
it.
no doubt in my mind that we have a fair use argument here on this, without a doubt. But we are at the whims of the various platforms that we are on.
Corporate control.
And they don't want to engage in this stuff. And so then they have their relationships. And so, we get the short end of it. But we're going to have multiple platforms. We will, if you don't have the app, go get it at majorityapp.com. That will give us the ability to contact you immediately and tell you where we're streaming live on what platform, because we're going to be on all the platforms. And
they won't be able to take our app down.
And they can't take our app down. I don't know if we have a direct video feed.
No, that'll just be audio.
That would just be audio.
Although we should look into that.
We should look into that. Yes.
I wonder how much that's affordable now.
It's been discussed. But nevertheless, we will let you know. So, tell your friends, but be quiet about it.
Whisper it to your friends.
Whisper it.
Send it in Signal.
Don't forget, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, hot chocolate. Get the Majority Report blend. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. Also, you can support this program by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. It is your support that allows this show to survive and thrive. Even with the CNNs out there and whatnot.
And the Rumbles.
Yep. Emma.
ESPN today, not yesterday, but that's because we have to comment on the really incredible Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals, where the Florida Panthers staved off disaster and did not lose 4 in a row after going up 3-0 in the series. They clamped down in the third period. We'll talk a little bit more about that, why I thought Barkov should have won the Conn Smythe. We'll also touch on the WNBA and a bit of an update on that gouging story that we covered on this show on Friday as it relates to jails in Michigan, where they basically ended in-person visits and started charging people for video calls. The Detroit Pistons owner is the one that is benefiting from that. So youtube.com/ESPN show.
Matt.
Tonight, Seamus Malek-Afzali comes back to Left Reckoning to talk Israel's, look at Lebanon for a potential invasion, what's going on in the region, Iranian elections, and more. Check that out tonight, patreon.com/Left Reckoning to get access to the post game and support David and I.
See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Anarchy. Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Cedar! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ Danner.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense.
You see white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males,
psych, fuck them. Snowflake says what?
What?
Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank.